Welcome to our first ever Zing Learning podcast titled A Conversation With, a podcast where we get together with inspiring individuals once a fortnight to chat about what they're doing in their careers and to explore conversations around enhancing equality, diversity, inclusion and belonging for everyone. Each fortnight, we will dive into a key topic, talk about things that interest us, and ask for some advice and top tips to create inclusive workspaces for all types of people. In our first podcast of Series 1, we are very excited to be joined by the incredible human that is Ash Bartholomew. We're going to discuss his transition journey, how his organisation supports him, plus he will be sharing advice and suggestions to help enhance inclusion and embed belonging for other business leaders. So grab a cuppa, kick back and enjoy the podcast. Hey Ash, we have been friends for a long time. We've been on holiday together, long live Villa Terry in Portugal, and the many fun times that we have had are countless, of course. But actually, during our friendship, you have gone through lots of really great things. So you've started a family, you've made impressive moves in your career, and also you have transitioned. So I kind of wanted to talk to you today a little bit about all of those things. And actually, I think if we kind of get started with your career in general, that would be really interesting. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and your experience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a product manager now, but I came into the creative industry through design. So I've been in products for about 5 years, and then before that, I was a designer for about 10 years. And I kind of found my way into product kind of by, I suppose, starting off with visual design and then wanting to get a bit more into the user experience because I like the idea of getting underneath the behaviors of people, and then from there moving in more into product because I get to make lots of decisions, I guess, right or wrongly. But yeah, and I get to do all of the things I enjoyed doing, talking to users and trying to create products that they want to use and that are successful for my clients.
Yeah, and it's really funny because I've known you for a really long time, and it's only really been recently that I've understood, well, I say understood your job. I probably still don't fully understand your job, but to really get to grips with it. And obviously I only found out recently that you got to work on the Joe Wicks app, which obviously everybody probably knows about. So that's very cool. I obviously know some of the other really big kind of apps that you've worked on and things like that. So I've just found it really fascinating getting to know your experience a little bit more. Before we kind of get into some of the other things, what's kind of been the highlight with regards to your career so far?
I think it probably is that, working on Joe Wicks's body coach app. I mean, it's given, not only is it allowed me to, really flesh out all of my skills in the product space, but also, I was featured as in the Apple's developer of the month, I think it was, for, they were calling out LGBT people in the industry. And so that was a great moment to be featured in that. But also it's just been a great project with great clients and I've just learned so much. And I feel like from my perspective, so long as I feel like I'm learning something and, learning new skills, then I feel like I'm doing a good job. So yeah, it's been great.
That's excellent. And it's really funny because you're kind of preaching to the converted here. I'm obviously massive on learning. So I love talking to people that do that with their career. And I have noticed anybody that I speak to in the kind of working world that tends to be quite successful in their roles, they tend to be that kind of forever learner. They tend to have that growth mindset. So it doesn't surprise me that that's kind of how you look at it. Definitely not.
Yeah, I think that's how I've ended up moving from, sort of like career to career because, I feel like I always want to be learning something else. And if I ever feel like I'm starting to stagnate a little bit, I'm like, oh, what's the next thing, I could move into? So, yeah, I think that's how I ended up where I am now.
Yeah. And in a good place you are, definitely. You mentioned a second ago, which I obviously know about, and I was very proud when I saw it, about the award that you got. And I think you talk about the LGBT community there, so that
Hmm.
kind of brings us on to the conversation that we're kind of having, and the reason that we're having this conversation in the first place. Of course, we want to talk about your career and want to talk about all the incredible things you've done, but actually, there's been some kind of invisible barriers from you coming from the LGBT plus community, and also the fact that you transitioned in the last few years
Hmm.
after being assigned female at birth. So let's talk a little bit about that, and what your experience has been in the working world around that in general.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I have been, incredibly lucky on that front. I have, I've been in my current role for many years. So, I've worked with all of the people there, both before and after transition, and obviously it's an ongoing process. It's never over. And I've had nothing but support from them, and I haven't had any. There hasn't been any friction at all. They've been very supportive. They've given me time off when I've needed it. Emotional support. They are, kind of like, we work together so much. We're friends. And it's even from, I took some time off for surgery, for example, and I emailed the company to say, hey, I'm not going to be around for a few weeks, which I probably would never have done if I'd known,
Mm.
knowing that they're supportive. And the response I got from that with everyone was just like, amazing, really
Mm.
good. So I count myself as very lucky because I know a lot of people don't have that same response. And it's something that's just been I've really appreciated with where I am now and the people I work with.
Yeah, I think you, like you say, you hate the word lucky, because I feel like we shouldn't that shouldn't be the case, right? This should be the standard. But unfortunately, we're miles away from that at the moment. But I do love this concept that actually there are employers and organizations out there that are genuinely doing the right thing by their people. Um, and I know this is going to be quite difficult because there's been so many fantastic things they've done, but is there anything that kind of sticks in your mind that kind of right at the start of you communicating your transition to people at work specifically, is there anything that sticks in your mind with regards to, oh, okay, this might not be as hard as perhaps I've heard it is with this organization?
Um, I'm not sure. Like, do you mean like things I was maybe worried about that didn't actually happen? That kind
Yeah, yeah. I
of,
think because a lot of people, when they're kind of in those early stages of a transition, or perhaps they're in those stages of thinking about communicating it to friends or family, or organizations and things like that. Some people do have some real horror stories, and
yeah.
I think that I'm so grateful that you didn't have that. But was there like a pivotal moment with your employer that kind of made you think, oh, actually, maybe I'm not going to have a horror story. Maybe this is actually going to be much more pleasant for me.
Yeah, I think so. I think with you know, getting prepared to tell people about these things was, a massive thing for me to have to do. I mean, it took
Mm.
me 37 years or something to get around to it. So, obviously it was a big deal. And I think the first, for the very first thing I did was to tell my line manager and the managing director of the company. I mean, my line manager was a good friend of mine anyway, so it just felt natural to tell her, and then the managing director. And I remember I sent an email, not expecting a response. And I think within like 10 or 15 minutes, I got a response back from the MD saying, I just want to acknowledge this email. I'm going to write back to you properly, but this is amazing and we will support you. And from then on, I was like, okay, you know what? This is going to be okay. And, it's, and then we had some time together. We went for a coffee, and then, we talked about whether I could have time off and, just to have, certain things that I needed to do, and if I ever needed some mental health breaks and things like that, then they were on offer to me. So yeah, I knew, and I think the next phase of it, or the next stage of it, I suppose, was letting people, just the general business, everyone I worked with, and
Yeah.
there's a good like 80 or so people in the company, And that always had filled me with dread over the years. I imagine
Yeah, I
sending
bet.
that email to
Mm.
everybody you've ever worked with. And obviously there's the clients on the other side, because I work in a client side. So I've worked with a lot of clients, and they're not even part of our company, but they would then also find out by the fact that we work together. So that was huge to send that out. And I think I wrote it out and I sat on it for a couple of days, and I was like, do I want to do this? And then I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And I did. And the response was just amazing. So yeah, and then think once I got that response and I had a bit of time off, so I sent the email and think I was then off for a couple of weeks. And then
Hmm.
by the time I came back, it was like everybody had accepted it, and I was now, they addressed me in the correct way. And there've been a few slip ups, obviously, but
Yeah.
everyone has made such an amazing effort. So yeah, but I think it was that real original response from the managing director when I was like, okay, um, they've got my back and they're going to support me on this, which was, yeah, great.
I love that. I love like in my head when you were saying that, I was just thinking that person, your managing director, was in a meeting, like a really important meeting that just popped up on their phone, and they were like, actually, I can't let Ash sit on this and wait for a response. Let me just make sure they know that this is great. I'm just going to kind of get to it. I think that that's a real human approach. And I think
Mhm.
that sometimes managing directors and CEOs, whoever those kind of really kind of senior people in organizations, they feel like they need to be seen to be disconnected in some way, to be looked at as professional. And actually, I think what you've just experienced and what you've just shared shows how important that human aspect is.
Definitely, yeah. And I think
Mm.
actually, if anything, she's probably got tried to do her best to counteract that, to make sure that we have regular check-ins, and on a human level, we have a relationship that is
Mm.
outside of the hierarchy of business, for example. And I think that goes for pretty much everyone I work with. We are encouraged to have a human level relationship with each other. So,
Mm.
when somebody has news or a baby, or they go away, or they leave, it's felt like really emotionally, I think, throughout the whole company, which is something that I think is probably quite unique, unfortunately, but it's just how things should be, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Sure.
you're right. That's definitely unique. And it's not standalone for sure. There's definitely, I think, other people out there that have transitioned, or perhaps they're thinking about communicating it to their organization, that will have a similar experience to you, which is great. And I think actually one of the reasons I wanted to have this podcast with you and have this chat was because I felt if we could get one or a handful of MDs or HR directors or what have you to listen to this and hear some kind of ideas and suggestions, so that the next time that somebody is transitioning in their organization, they can support them even better, then fantastic.
Mhm.
But yeah, I remember when we first talked about doing this podcast, you were like, I'm so sorry, I haven't got any horror stories. And I was like, no, that's great. Actually, it's not always about the kind of things that are really difficult. And obviously we want to spread as much of that as possible. But you mentioned a minute ago about working with different clients as well. So you had a really great reaction internally, which is fantastic. And obviously that was led from the top, which is so important when we think about anything to do with that kind of that approach to culture and the way in which people are treated. Um, so the client aspect, then I'm always really interested in this, because a lot of my clients that I work with, we talk a lot about the internal culture, but I also talk about the affiliation and the supplier relationships they have, and actually how important that is with regards to diversity and inclusion in general. Um, were there any situations with suppliers or clients that have been more challenging, or have you just found it the same across the board?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I have been on the body coach project now for the last 2.5 years. So I
Mm.
pretty much, I came out to the business. I went away for a couple of weeks. When I came back, I started on this project,
Hmm.
and they they are the most wonderful clients. So yeah, I mean, there's always, I think, new moments when you meet new people, and it's something I'm hyper aware of, and that's, other people wouldn't be, because it's, but I can see, I and I can see when people are a little bit like, what? it's a very small, like, facial expression, and they don't realize they're doing it, but I'm hyper aware of it because I'm
Yeah.
always aware of, like, do people know, what are they thinking, all that kind of thing. But apart from that, I mean, that's just a natural response. I think people are like, okay, bit confused, but whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then, I have never been misgendered by them ever.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
they've just been great. There have been clients over the past where I think, there could have been, I mean, I probably would have been less comfortable sharing it with them.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Particularly, I think some kinds of corporations or some kinds of relationships you have with people just aren't the same. So,
Mm,
but with this client, it's been great, and I haven't felt the need to, you know, tell anyone not to say anything, or, I mean, I'm quite open with this, with my transition and stuff, and a lot of people aren't. So it would be
mm,
very different if you spoke to someone who would want to stay stealth, for example, in which case you would want only the bare minimum of people to know, whereas I'm
yeah.
not, I'm not like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, my experience is different in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's a good point, actually, because everybody's experience is completely different.
Yeah.
So, what might have worked for you in your organization, and the way that, say, that instant kind of moment where your MD responded in that way instantly kind of helped your shoulders to relax a little bit, and for you to go, okay, maybe actually this is going to be a little bit easier than I thought. And I don't think everybody does have that experience. But yeah, I think we'll come back and kind of circle back to this in a minute, because I want to talk a little bit about some kind of suggestions that you think have kind of worked for you in your organizations. But I think before we get into that, I kind of want to dive a little bit into the idea of how misunderstood trans people are, and all of those sorts of things. So what's the kind of most common misconception that people make about you in general?
Oh, I'm not
Nice easy
sure.
one for you there.
Yeah, straight in there. Misconception wise, I'm not sure really. I mean, there's, I try to stay out of a lot of the negative things you see, because, like, you only have to go on, like, for example, one news article about a trans athlete, for example, and you'll just get a whole ton of, it's a mental illness, and, we shouldn't be encouraging it, and all that kind of stuff. But personally, I haven't, apart from reading those things, which I try not to, I haven't
Mm,
really, I don't think had. I'm trying to think what misconceptions there could be, I suppose. Um, yeah, I can't really think of any.
okay. Maybe we should look at the question in a slightly different way then, and
Mhm.
maybe we can think about, what if there was like one thing that you wish people knew about trans people, or about the experience of transitioning. What do you think that would be, if you think, oh, that would really help people to understand the kind of situation a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some, like, just practical things that
Mm-hmm.
are, so small things like going to the toilet. That is, like, one of the biggest stressors that
Yeah.
that I have, particularly, at work we have unisex toilets, so
Mm-hmm.
it's not a problem. But
Sure.
if I'm at a pub, I and you have to go, there's an expectation you go to a specific gendered toilet, and you're like, do I feel safe in there? And can I go in there? And sometimes I've just not gone because I'm like, I can't, or
Wow.
I'll go into a men's loo and there'll only be urinals. And you're like, right, okay, I can't use those. So now I can't go to the toilet. So I
Mm,
think, and this, at work, if you can make that space for people to feel comfortable, going to the loo, which is a very basic thing, there are certain things like that where it's just the experience is different. Like, cisgendered people don't have to worry about, am I going to be able to go to the toilet when I go out?
mm,
Whereas,
mm,
lots of trans people do. Or things like, assigned female at birth, or trans masculine, transgender males may still menstruate, and then you go into men's toilets and there's no sanitary bins in there. So what do you do? So it's like these kind of practical things that just they're quite small, but they would just make life so much easier for people.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a big one for me, because that has taken me a while to get my head around as well. Because you kind of tie yourself in knots as well around, do I pass enough to be gendered correctly and not be approached to be in the wrong toilets, or do I pass too much that if I continue to use the female toilets, that I get called out for being in there, and you're
Mm.
constantly in this kind of like, well, which one do I go? Oh, I'll just go to the disabled toilets if there is one, kind of thing. So things like that would be really helpful, I think. um
Wow. Yeah. Do you know what? That it's so interesting because I guess when you kind of read about trans rights, or when you kind of think about the progression, which definitely feels like it's sped up in the last few years, but is still very much far behind lots of other kind of rights. The toilet thing always comes up, and I always think, oh, okay, yeah, that's important. But I guess I never really understood how important that was, because it's just so interesting. There was something I saw on social media the other day where somebody went to a client's offices, and they actually had one kind of space for the toilets, and the signage was fantastic. It was so inclusive. So it was for every single type of person.
mhm.
The person that was changing the nappy on the symbol wasn't a woman. There were some really great things on there, and I think that's really important. But yeah, I guess it's so important, but it's just not something. I'm cisgender, so it's not something I have to think about. And I'm quite feminine in the way I look as well, so I don't even ever have to consider that as a general rule. But yeah, really interesting, really interesting. Okay, so then what about some of the kind of positive things that have kind of come from your transition? What do you know, or what do you know about yourself now that perhaps you didn't know before? Is there anything kind of positive that's come out of this, apart from the fact that you can actually be the identity that you are?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it really. I mean, it wasn't it's an interesting thing, because I think for some people it's a really a moment for sort of celebration, or
Mm.
it's something to be proud of. But for me, it just felt like, it's just something that just needed to happen. Do you know what I mean? So it's not something that I really celebrate, but it's more like, I'm on this path and I need to go on this path. Perhaps if I was younger and I'd have done it then it probably wouldn't have got to the point where it felt like that, and maybe it would have felt a bit more like, this is amazing and I feel really great about it. But also, it's
Mm.
a really long process. I mean, I've been transitioning for 2 years, but I'm nowhere near, you know I mean, I don't know if it ever ends, to be honest.
Mm.
And yeah, so it's yeah, I think the positive things is just not having to think about it, all the time, having to be like worrying about, I need to do this thing, but I don't want to do it. It's done now. I can just get on with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's funny because I'd spend a lot of time in a lot of my workshops, especially the early ones with clients, where we're trying to get them to understand the business case of D&I. And we obviously talk about the human aspect, but we're also talking about the fact, you know what, if people can just come into work as themselves, they'll probably do a better job. They'll be more productive, they'll be more collaborative, they'll have better outcomes, and they'll have a desire to want to do a good job day in day out, because they're not trying to kind of hide a little bit about themselves, or having to second guess everything, and try and remember what it is that they've kind of spoken to different people about and things like that. So I think that I mean, it doesn't just go for work, of course, it goes for life as well,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah. I think this is a thing as well for me with being open about it, because I think if you were, and there are people who prefer to stay stealth and they don't want anyone to know, but the mental overload of that, to be
Mm.
like, even now, actually, whenever you do, like, I mean, I assume like, you do lots of things like this already, but like when you have a workshop and you do kind of like an energizer, or you do like a get to know you thing, and then sometimes you might have bring a picture of you in as a kid, and you're like, don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because I don't need people to, or for a long time actually recording my voice. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to hear it back, and I don't listen to it back. But that kind of like put me off doing a lot of company wide video meetings and stuff that I just back out of a little bit now because I know they're all recorded. But things like that, I think, even though I'm really open about it, things like that still make me cringe. Like the idea that there's a recording of me like 3 years ago where my voice is very different, or
Yeah.
there's a presentation file with my old name on it. Do you know those kind of things? So I
Yeah.
imagine if you were
Yeah.
like completely stealth, you would have to be constantly thinking, what am I saying? Am I saying something that might give me away? So I don't have to worry about that bit. And these things, although I don't like the idea of them, they don't impact my day-to-day work. I still have lots of meetings. I still do demos every 2 weeks. I still talk to my clients all the time. But yeah, it's just that when I think about it, I'm like, oh no, I wouldn't. I'm not going to go back and listen to those recordings. But it's interesting because obviously there's a pre-recorded version of me and my working experience in this company, and now there's another one.
Oh
And
wow.
anyone who's
Yeah.
followed me through this journey knows me both before and after. And in some ways, that's kind of like good because we can talk openly about these things. In some ways it's like, well, maybe I would rather they didn't know, or they weren't thinking, oh, it's um as an example, like I think about a year ago with COVID, obviously we weren't meeting anyone, and then we had, when the lockdown lifted, we had our first face-to-face social with the company, and I was quite worried about that because I'm like, no one's seen me for a year. And I know they're going to be like, oh, your voice has changed, or oh, you look a bit different. And even though they don't say those things, I can see it playing out in their faces because, like I said before, I'm hyper aware
Yeah.
of
Those
this.
tiny nuances.
Yeah, so that happens, if I haven't seen anyone for a long time and then I see them and I'm like, what are they going to, what's their reaction going to be? I mean, it's all been positive, but yeah,
Yeah.
there's always these constant mental things that are going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you were, it's better that I can talk about those things and I'm not constantly worried about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think because it must be exhausting as well to just constantly have to kind of think around these things so often. One of the words you've mentioned quite a few times, I just want to make sure that it's nice and clear for the viewers. I was about to say they won't be watching this. The listeners
Yeah.
is the word stealth. Do you think that you can help explain that just for the listeners, just in case it's a word they've never heard before?
Yeah, sure. So for some trans people, they don't want anybody to know that they are trans. So I think once you get to some people get to a certain point in their transition where what they call pass, like you wouldn't second guess their gender in public, that kind of thing. And once they get to that point, they're like, you know what, nobody needs to know anymore that I'm a trans person, and therefore I am not going to tell anyone, and I'm going to live in the gender that I want to be, and nobody needs to know my past. And and we call that stealth. So they're now stealth. They don't disclose their status.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I
Okay.
can imagine for some people is a safety thing, because what
Yeah.
that it can be extremely unsafe to be a trans person. So you wouldn't want anybody to know.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, just on the flip side of that, um, you know, that you don't have to be on hormones or have corrective surgery or dress a certain way to be, you're not more trans than someone else. So I think there is a slight danger in that language, whereas you assume that, well, you're not trans unless you go down this path that I've been down. So it's very there's a lot of language, I think, that we use in the trans community that can be exclusionary, that we shouldn't really be using. So, but still, I think it's important for people to know that there are people who just don't want anyone to know, and that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And that danger thing is so real for so many people, isn't it? And you hear horror stories, unfortunately, in the UK just as well as other parts of the world. So I can totally understand why some people would kind of would want to not kind of have the trans word
yeah.
attached to them. But also not just from a danger perspective, I'm sure, actually, just from the way that they feel about themselves and what have you.
Oh,
But yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, for some people are really proud of it, of their status. Other people are like, it's not a thing. Like I'm not super proud of it, but I don't mind people knowing.
mm.
But then some people are like, I don't, this. Why would I tell anyone? I'm no different to anyone else. So you know what I mean? It's that kind of everyone's different.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, you say you're not proud of it. And actually, I know you quite well. So I know you're quite a private person.
Hmm.
So I kind of get where you're coming from with that and that kind of thought process.
Yeah.
I was just thinking as well, because you were saying earlier about how there were things recorded 3 years ago. And I'm just thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't make you listen to this in 3 years' time.
Yeah, I probably won't.
We'll lose it somewhere in the archives. Don't worry.
I trust you to edit it in a nice way. And
I'll make sure you never have to hear it after we release it. Um, I've got a few more things that I'd love to kind of touch base with you on, because I think this. I mean, I love chatting to you anyway. You know that, but I think that this is such an important topic for so many different types of people, especially those people that don't really understand what it's like to be trans in the working world. So we're talking
then,
obviously specifically about work, but um, I think what would be really good to know, in your opinion, and obviously you're one person, you don't represent every single person that is trans, but is there anything that you wish your industry kind of did better to support people from the LGBT plus community, or maybe you think there's one thing that your industry does better, perhaps, than other industries in that respect?
yeah, I mean, you know, I think there are places in the industry that are doing better, and I think they are kind of trailblazing a little bit. And I think um, us two, where I work, is one of those. Where D&I is super important, as
Mm.
is, the hiring process to make sure it's as inclusive as possible, that kind of stuff. But I think there's a long way to go. I think
Yeah.
across the industry as a whole, I think, I think it's the case for, any any marginalized group that needs more support. So yeah, I think there are companies that are doing better than others, but it is great that there are those out in front and paving the way and making sure that diversity is number one. Like, having a diverse workforce is just, it has so many benefits, as you know. So that's something that is really important to me as well. It's like, I don't want to work places that aren't diverse, because it everywhere should be. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean, like, hiring practices, helping people on board, all that kind of thing to make sure it's as inclusive as possible, I think is really important. I think probably the creative industry probably is, you know, further ahead than others. There's creative people in general, I suppose, should be more open to, wider groups of people. Um, but yeah, it's still obviously there's always a long way to go on these things.
Mm, yeah, yeah. It's interesting though. I work in some offices where there's some fantastic social enterprises and different charities and stuff, and people just doing really good things for the world. And there's a really great recruitment company there called Found by Few, which I'm sure they're not going to mind me mentioning here. And they do a lot of work, not just on that kind of creative kind of space with regards to recruitment, but they really strive to change the face of the creative industries, because it a lot of the time it's a very similar type of person that is being hired and promoted and what have you, and kind of in the startup spaces and stuff itself. And I've loved watching them grow. I mean, their growth has been fantastic, because they're really about the individual, and they're really about changing the way that the creative industry recruits.
Mhm.
But I also love how much they're learning as well. They're constantly, bringing speakers in and experts in all these different areas so that they can make sure that they're keeping their knowledge topped up as well. So I wonder then actually whether there's some work in the creative industry, as to be fair with all the industries, where
Yeah.
it is that let's just have some conversations. Let's just really start to get to hear it from somebody that's experiencing this particular marginalization. And I think that is how you breed diversity. That's how you start to really attract different types of people
Yeah.
to the industries. And then, like you say, I mean, the business case for diversity is it's phenomenal. It's the data's there. The revenue increase and the retention and all of these fantastic things, the customer loyalty, and also there's a huge percentage of people coming through the talent pool now, in the creative industries as well as some others, that they won't, like you said, like yourself, you won't go and work somewhere. You won't go and
Mhm.
take your talent and your potential and your skills, and your ideas to an organization that isn't diverse and doesn't treat people in that way. So it's not just about right now and making sure that companies are doing the right thing and being fantastic right now. It's actually the future. I just don't think those companies are going to last. I don't think they're going to be able to, because millennials are coming through, and even the generation that's kind of being built up in schools now, they're just not going to want to work for those types of companies that aren't diverse.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Mm.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so I just wanted to ask you just for some kind of advice or some suggestions, just about how organizations can support people that are maybe transitioning, or perhaps they're thinking about communicating their transition, or perhaps they've already transitioned, and they want to communicate that with their organizations, because I think you've had such a good experience with us too. And big shout out to them. I just think it's fantastic the way that they treat the human beings in their organization is really a lesson to be learned for lots of other organizations. But the first piece of advice I think I'd love to get from you, and it's your opinion, so of course lots of people will have different ideas, but how can managers talk about kind of trans issues, or conversations about trans issues with their teams?
Yeah. I mean, that one of the things that us two did that I really appreciated was shortly after I came out, they got in, I forgot what they're called now. They got in this trans speaker to come in and talk to everybody who worked there about what it felt, what it was like to be trans, how to support trans people, how to use, the correct language and terminology. And they've done a few of those. Gendered intelligence, they were called. They came in and they've done a couple of talks.
Oh,
And I
brilliant.
felt like, for me, that just took all of the pressure off of me having to do that. And it was
Mm,
like they got someone in, and then, because I feel like some people don't want to have the conversations because they're worried about saying the wrong things, or they don't know how to ask a question in a way that they feel like won't be offensive. So I
mm,
think they steer away from it and they don't ask. But I think having, the gendered intelligence come in, they could ask that person these questions, and it wasn't, it wasn't such a personal level. Do you know what I mean?
mm.
Like, they could ask the hard questions and get the answers. So that was really, really great for me. So I think there are lots of resources, and I think it's there are things you can do to learn more about it, and the trans experience, and try to be an advocate. And I think that's the thing. It's kind of like finding people who you feel would be an advocate for you and help you, help support you. Or like, if you're like, oh, I want to tell someone this, what do you what do you think about, not that you would ask them permission, but just sort of. And it's difficult because I had so much support from everyone that, I don't know specifically, but I think that if you can get just more knowledge on what it's like to live, as in a different world, for example, then I think that helps. For someone who's working somewhere, who's thinking about coming out, um, yeah, I mean, I think it's trust the relationships you have, like your strongest relationships you have, and and talk to those people first, and they can help support you in what you need.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Gendered intelligence as well. Like, I love that they've brought these people in because, us two then created a safe space for people
Hmm.
to be able to ask these questions. They also took the pressure off you having to be the number one trans expert, like, because you were probably still learning, and you probably are still learning now, about your own experience, but also that of the community in general. So I think it's great that you bring in these, and this is 100% what organizations should be doing, is bringing in the experts. Don't rely and don't force that person or that group of people to be the spokespeople, because even if they are comfortable talking about it, they don't want to talk on behalf of everyone else. That's not really
Hmm.
how it works. And like you said, it took the pressure off you, which I think is fantastic. And yeah, big round of applause for them for doing that. Such a simple thing as well. And I think it doesn't just work, obviously, when we're talking about trans kind of areas and things like that. It works across all of the different marginalized groups. And I'm a big advocate for getting expert speakers in to really kind of open up that conversation and create a space where people can ask questions. Because especially if it's something that they're not used to talking about on a daily basis, they're going to be intrigued, they're going to be curious, and then, like you said, they're not going to want to step a foot wrong and
Hmm.
kind of don't ask any questions because they're worried about getting it wrong. So yeah, really love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what piece of advice would you give other organizations that are kind of working with this? So we've got a really great piece of advice there around bringing in expert speakers. Is there any other kind of advice that you would give to another organization thinking about kind of opening up this conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there are, you know, there's the emotional support around these things, and to acknowledge, I think that, somebody who's going through the process of transition or even thinking about coming out are in a very vulnerable space.
Yeah.
They are putting themselves out there. And for me, that was massive because, like you said, I'm a very private person. And then all of a sudden, everyone, I'm topic of conversation. I mean, I don't know if that's the case because obviously, I don't think I
Yeah,
was,
the
but
award
it
didn't
felt
help, did
that
it?
way. Yeah, I mean, it felt that way, So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think for, you know, even just to recognize that somebody is going through big feelings at that point,
Yeah.
and they may need some space. I mean, obviously, we're businesses and stuff, but I genuinely think that if people don't have the space to process these things, then you're not going to get out of them what you need,
Yeah.
as a business anyway. So you know give them space, understand that they might need time off for medical reasons. Some people do, some people don't. I've always been very, us two's always been very good to say, if you need time off to go and do whatever see a doctor, for example, you can go ahead and do that. So I've not felt like I had to use my holidays or unpaid leave. Like, they've been supportive with all of that. And if we do need, if I ever feel like the whole company actually has mental wellness days where if you feel like you need to go away and have self-care, you can. I mean, I know not everybody can do that, but I think there is just something in acknowledging that it's a big deal for people to be going through that, and
Mm.
they don't need added pressure of performance on top. um I think that's the emotional side of it. But then I think there's like more of a practical side of things, like helping get paperwork sorted out, helping change names on pay slips, or sorting pension names out, which I've not managed to do because the pension company are
Mm.
being a pain. But it's there's certain things that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what you need in order to change your identity.
Mm.
Lots of people think you need a gender recognition certificate, for example. That's not actually the case for a lot of things. Or some people think you need a rubber stamped deed poll from a solicitor. That also isn't the case. But then you end up coming up against these gates all the time of people, and you have to go in and explain, no, you don't need to do this. So I think could be some awareness from the company to be like, that help, just help help get the paperwork sorted out, help understand that gender recognition certificates have a whole hoops to jump through and many years to get one sorted out. So do what you can before you even get that. Those sorts of things are really helpful because there is a hell of a lot of paperwork to get sorted out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I never really thought about the paperwork aspect. Yeah, of course, because yeah, if you're cisgender, you kind of you've got your birth certificate, you've got your passport, everything's kind of set up on the name that you already have. So yeah, interesting. Okay, that's definitely something for me to go away and have a bit of a reflect about, and hopefully people that are listening to this, that's something for them to have a little bit of a think about. And one of the things I always talk about in with my clients, whether it's in a facilitated session or maybe just a conversation with the exec or whatever, is about this idea that actually ask the person, what it is that they need. Because like you've said, everybody who is transitioning or considering or they've already transitioned, they're going to have very different needs and they're going to want very different levels of support. So I think that that's something that your organization did really, really well,
Yeah.
which I think you'll probably agree.
Yeah.
I'm getting
Yeah,
lots
I
of
mean,
nods. People can't hear that, but I'm getting lots of nods.
yeah, I mean, it's it's all been on my own time frame. Like,
Mm.
there's never been any pressure to, I just, take things as and when I'm ready for them, and I let them know what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there is that. Um, yeah, not pressure. Everyone's journey is different, and everyone's going to need something slightly different. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that goes with everything. I've just been reading a really great book around hidden disabilities, and the author's actually gone and spoken to so many tons and tons of people. And actually, at the end of each of the conversations, they've said, okay, so what is it that you can ask for? What would you ask for your organization to help you? And they've given these really great tips at the end for each of these different things. But the whole concept of the book is just treat the individual as an individual.
Mhm.
You might think everything about this particular topic or this particular marginalized group, but actually you don't, because every single person is different. So I think if that's the big takeaway from this conversation that people can take, I think that's a really great one. And the fact that it doesn't always have to be horror stories. We know that there's some hideous things that happen out there, but sometimes organizations get it right. And I'm so glad that you're one of the people that had that experience, because you're my friend and I'm biased. What can I say?
Yeah.
But no, I think it's great, and I hope there's people listening to this now that might maybe go about something slightly differently when they're kind of dealing with conversations around this, or perhaps even if they're managing somebody that comes to them and says, oh, hi, I'm transitioning, what support
Mhm.
can you give me? They might have a little bit more of an idea now of how they can do that. I've got one last question before I thank you and we kind of sign off, which is, what piece of advice would you give to young professionals who are transitioning or who have transitioned?
Young professionals. Yeah, that's a. I think I think what I'd say to young professionals, I think, is, if you get any kind of warning bells or anything in the hiring process, or when scoping out where to work or who to work with, trust your gut. And you know, sorry, looking for onesies. Looking for onesies. You
Oh,
can,
that's the little one.
yeah,
The real life of working from home.
yeah, but you can chop that bit out.
I might
Um,
not.
but yeah, I think that's it. I think, when you're young, I mean, thinking back a long time ago for me, you kind of, especially when you're trying to get into a new career, and I think sometimes you feel like you have to take a substandard experience just to get on the ladder. And I
Mm,
really hope, and I feel like things are changing now, and there are more opportunities, and that people wouldn't have to do that. I mean, I know that's an idealistic point of view, but I feel like there is something in trusting your gut and knowing that, whether it's right or not, because if you're also having to deal with, you know, not being cisgendered, or, in any kind of group that, a small group of people, then you're like, that's just something on top of that as well.
yeah.
So also, like, chat to people who work there. I think the other thing is, like, just in general support wise outside of, you know, the working world as well. Like there are loads of support groups and, you know, social meetups and stuff. And if you can get to those, then, you know, you can talk to those people about their experiences in working in certain places and, you know, get guidance, I suppose, from there. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think the main thing is, you know, yeah, those, if you get any alarm bells, then trust your gut and move
Yeah, you're normally right. Yeah.
somewhere else. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh. Oh, listen, thank you so much. I've got like 10 new ways that I can have a conversation around this now and some really great tips that I can take forward. But I've loved this, and I think, you know, I know you're a private person. I know you don't want to be the spokespeople for kind of trans awareness and things like that, but I do think it's really helpful to hear from somebody that has and is going through the
Mhm.
transition period. And I've certainly learned a few new things, and hopefully our listeners have as well. But thank you so much. It. What a fantastic podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed that as much as we did, and you've taken away as many tips and suggestions as we have to support people in your organisation who are transitioning, regardless of which part of the journey they're at the moment. We loved having this conversation. If you want to have more conversations like this, or you want to just talk about your D&I learning in general, then get in touch with us or go and have a look at our website, which is zingrevolution.co.uk. Thanks. We'll see you on the next one.